so much for being here, because I do appreciate it's 4:30 on the first day of Fast Forward, and that usually means beers. Although I do think we do have a beer here. So yeah, really appreciate you being here, thank you. As Chris said, I'm Liz Stokes. I'm the editor of a music business publication called Record of the Day in the UK, which hopefully a few of you are aware of. As is the way of Fast Forward, the title of this panel is pretty self-explanatory, so hopefully you all know why you're here, and talk about the future of advertising. However, aside from that, I do think we need to talk about what's working now as well as what's working or what's going to happen in the future, how these things are going to evolve. To kick us off, let's do introductions. Pat, if we start with you, have you got a mic? Do you want to say who you are and where you're from? And maybe just a little bit about how you use advertising, where advertising sort of weaves into your role.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pat Carr. I'm now at my own company called Remote Control. I've been around a bit, and I'm the age element, I think, at this conference, actually, to be frank. So, yes, I've been doing this a long time. I've used advertising, and I've seen advertising change. I think that's one of the things I could possibly bring to this, from right the way through where you put up some fly posters and then waited a week until you got the charts on a Tuesday and wondered if that worked or not, when you got no data at all, right the way through to all the stuff that's happening now, which for me is still a thrill. I still love it. I think the people that know me well know how I love the porn, I call it, the porn data, because it pulls you in. Advertising is a horrible word, but it does inform, I think, everything we do. It's all very well, we can set everything up all we like, but if we don't tell people about it, and we don't tell people about it in the right way, then it's just, it doesn't exist. So it's about, I think it's a very important part of things, and sometimes maligned, because I think it's important, and I think it's a big responsibility of taking music and putting it in front of people in the right way, so that the people who created it are happy and it's respectful. So that's my take on advertising.
All right. That was brilliant. So I'm continuing that. Hi, my name is Nikoo. Yeah, exactly. Cheers. Pound's done. My name is Nikoo, and I work for a music and film distribution company called The Orchard. Just recently relocated to start our Stockholm office, which is amazing. And on a more how advertising ties in, well, I work with digital marketing and advertising, so that is my role. I plan and execute campaigns for our artists and labels, and it's very much on from everything from planning it to actually getting dirty and in there, and knowing how Facebook annoys the hell out of me, for example, and things like that. You all know, everyone that works with Facebook, you all know. Come on.
So I'm Seb, I'm head of digital for Warner Brothers in the UK, and similar to Nikoo, I'd probably use digital advertising in a kind of very similar capacity. I think it's mostly a storytelling element for the sort of capacity in which I use it. I've worked in marketing previously 5 years before, so there's a kind of broader perspective on that, but I'm sure we'll get into that more.
Hi, my name is Abhishek. I'm one of the co-founders of a startup called NumberEight. We're based in London, and we are actually building artificial intelligence software to predict user context, and we see a lot of applications for that in real-time audio advertising.
We're going to have to deep dive that in a minute, I think. But to start, I want to talk about what is essentially the biggest ad network ever to exist, and we're going to have to touch on it at some point, and that's social media. Sorry. I was looking at some stats because I wanted to kind of put some perspective on this. And Facebook recently announced that they had 2.2 billion active monthly users. And the global active monthly users for the internet is at 4 billion. So you're talking over half of the active users on the internet are now using Facebook on a monthly basis. We've also got Instagram at 700 million, Twitter at 328 million, Snapchat at 255 million, YouTube 1.5 billion. If you're going to have targeted advertising, it's going to be on social media. But there's so much noise. So I want to talk to you guys about how adverts are working on social media for you now. How are you using social media when there are so many people? What works?
Well, I think with social media, it's there to build relationships and people talk with each other on social media. Like, if, for example, if we're talking about the biggest platform, Facebook. So people talk to each other. And so when you're doing advertising there, you sort of, like good advertising, it needs to fit in within the conversation of the platform, like how people interact on that platform. So I think it's not always possible, unfortunately, but I think you have to start with that, like how can we plan something and advertise something that feels natural and that people actually trust in terms of like building a relationship.
So when you talk about advertising on Facebook, you're not necessarily thinking about a paid post with a paid link. You're thinking about literally posts on a Facebook page that are just part of a conversation. It's not an advert in a traditional sense.
Yeah, and obviously you need to think about the targeting. That's where targeting comes in, because different types of audiences require different types of advertising if you're doing it well. But yeah, that is one part. Like, you're not going to speak to your fans the same way that you're speaking to potentially new fans, so you can't necessarily drive the same ad. And obviously we need to advertise in a more traditional, like, hey, here's my album, buy my album now. But in between those times, I think it's really important to build up the relationship so that we just don't push. I mean, the platforms are not used, they're not used for that normally. And so good advertising blends in with the platform. So you need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I was reading something recently as well that said you can get round ad blockers by being part of the conversation. Is that something that you're dealing with?
There are a few ways of doing it. Ad blockers are actually really interesting because, yeah, I actually read, I think it was the same article. It was like they're expecting 30% of people to have ad blockers by the end of 2018, which is very interesting. And of course, we don't really see how that necessarily impacts your campaign. Like, you don't see the people that don't see the ad. But in terms of that, that's where influencer marketing, for example, can come in. So yeah, there are ways of getting around that. But I ultimately think, like, you need to, sorry, I'm just blabbering on, but I ultimately think that you just need to have good creative content and know who you're talking to and actually value and respect them as well.
Some of the biggest ad blockers, to a certain extent, can be if you talk to the fans wrongly, then that's your biggest ad blocker right there. You know, nobody bought anything because they saw an ad. They bought something because, there was something that happened to be an ad that interested them. And that's the way to do it properly on social media, I mean, in my opinion.
And Seb, is this a conversation that you're having as well?
Yeah, I think sort of a few years ago we were all quite guilty of making a TV ad and then just repurposing it in whatever form was necessary to where we were advertising it. But on that tip about making sure things are really natural to their environment, you need to be making sure the adverts you're creating and the story you're trying to tell with those adverts aligns with the individual social platforms. So what you're doing on Instagram for stories is not going to be the same as what you're using on YouTube. It's like it needs to be native to that platform in the way in which the consumer's using it.
It takes a lot of time, but it's actually worth it doing that. Yeah.
Abby, are you thinking about social media at all in your kind of world, or?
In terms of an audience, it depends, because our software, like the way we are actually thinking of it, our software actually sits on mobile devices. So in terms of engagement is typically on 2.2 billion and 320 million. That's where people are enjoying content. Now, in terms of audio advertising and content advertising and then video advertising, these are all very different, ways you can advertise. As you're saying, how you advertise and how you tailor it based on the content has a big role in how you can engage with your audience. So what we're looking at is that, yes, our initial target is audio, but what we're building out, it can actually apply to any content means. Yeah.
Okay. So. We're not going to talk about social media for an hour, but just before, I think one of the constant chatters that we keep hearing is that if you want engagement on Facebook, and engagement is the word that's going to keep coming up, you have to pay for it. Otherwise, you're going to get hidden, especially when it comes to artist pages. What's your kind of opinion? What are your experiences with that? Is Facebook just money hungry?
I think that behind the scenes, quietly over the last few years, algorithmically, it's been favouring friend content more than page content, and now it's become more of a housekeeping exercise. So content that you feel you want to get seen from the audience that's on that page does kind of have to be promoted with ad spend. But as a kind of, I think as a sort of rule, the way in which I sort of look at that and do that is you only really want to back your winners. So when you see that something's organically working, that's your sign to say that that's something that is truly engaging with the audience. It's not practical to be putting paid spend behind every single post you put up just to reach the entire audience that's there. So I think it's really just about backing the things that are making noise.
And what's return on investment?
Let's add one thing is, on that cost, they're talking, if you actually try to target your audience in London, when we try to promote our own Facebook page, it was very interesting because we got a tip that's saying, okay, yeah, if you guys want to advertise your page and get it liked by a whole bunch of people, get the likes from Azerbaijan or Algeria or Tunisia, that the cost per click is a lot lower than London. London's probably going to be 50 to, maybe it's $1, $2, but in Azerbaijan it might be pennies. So it depends on where you want to go after your audience again.
Yeah, it's the inventory is cheaper in markets where there's less demand for the inventory, so naturally you can get things done more cost efficiently in markets like that, but then you get into this kind of game where you end up creating an influx of people that actually aren't representatively and true of what you've created.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, you have to be aware of your audience and like who you want to reach and who's actually relevant, because especially if you're keeping them in the same campaign, like you have to actually split those target. Like you might have people in Mexico that are really interested in your product, but if you're putting them in the same campaign as the people in London, all the ad spend is going to go to the people in Mexico.
And they're going to buy Boggle music.
Yeah, so it's just, and those things are also really important when you're advertising, actually realizing why, how much will I get back and why am I advertising that? Yeah.
There's no point in doing it just for the sake of it. Quite often we sort of see, ad campaigns going, this is going to be amazing. We're going to spend £5 million on Facebook and this, that, and the other. It's just like, don't spend £100. See how it goes. Make it work hard. Yeah. It's you don't have to spend money. If you're having to spend money, you're doing it wrong.
And I was going to ask about return on investment as well with Facebook, because, obviously it's an enormous advertising platform and people are spending the money to promote links or, whatever it might be. Does that automatically mean that there is a good return on investment if you're spending money on advertising on Facebook? How's your kind of experience been with that?
Go ahead.
I think you've got to be level-headed about what you want to get out of this kind of advertising and a return on investment kind of philosophy. I don't think advertising to somebody, even if they're super relevant, engaged, and like what you're saying, is going to result in someone clicking on a link and directly going off that platform to stream or buy something. So I think it's more just about having a measured take on what you consider to be valuable in that sense, whether it's engagement or reach or a combination of those things that's resonating with the audience, and you get a really anecdotal feel for that, and then that's backed up by the data.
And I think that but on social media, it's really important to be aware, like any types of advertising that you're doing there, you're actually doing it to be on top, to grab attention. You might, because we live in, everyone's fighting for attention, right? So it's more about like staying on top of someone's mind, and then if I actually really like the content that I've seen, or it's really well made or creative, I might not go click on that link directly if I see it on Instagram stories, but it's on my mind if it's an artist I like, and might go in a few days later.
Which I guess for you though is a nightmare, because how do you know if it's working?
It is a nightmare, yeah. You can't always track that, so it has to be part of a bigger campaign. And
you feel it, you get to feel it. You can see, if people are coming back. So, quite often, advertising isn't about getting someone to click buy now. Sometimes it's just, you're just slowly just chipping away at somebody so that they just start to fall in love with your artist. And that's what it's about. It's not, if you're trying to do it for the instant click and the instant validation, then some things, yes, that does work on, but not everything. You have to take a view. Every artist is different, and you can use it on socials. Yeah,
and I think music is kind of inherently a moment-based kind of industry. Like you can't advertise nothing. You have to have moments and that moment doesn't have to be a big moment, but you have to have something to storytell what that is. Otherwise, you really struggle to make a meaningful connection.
Well, it's really funny that you actually used the word moments, because one of the other things I was thinking about was that you can sponsor moments on Twitter now, can't you? You know, that where you're flicking through, has everyone seen this? They know what I'm talking about. And also you can get on the Discover page of Snapchat, which I think is almost is it too brash and obvious if someone sees sponsored or paid for? How do audiences react now when they see that kind of, obviously this has been placed here by money kind of situation?
I think it's the content. As long as the content that's being advertised there is strong, I don't think there's any sort of negative to it. But sort of drawing back to music again, if you're sponsoring a moment, so you're sponsoring hypothetically the Brits, and you have an artist playing the Brits, that's the moment. I think then to then go and sponsor that when you're already signposting that moment with the fact that you're performing on the Brits, I don't know if it's going to have that much of a sort of meaningful connection with people, because if you were to flip it and go, you're a sort of a FMCG brand or whatever, and you can't get visibility in that space because it's just not that sort of platform for you, then it makes sense to kind of have that brand association with the event or the moment. But I think for music, the moment is being in the moment. I mean, there are obviously examples where you could probably go into spaces where you otherwise wouldn't be, but that's how I kind of approach it.
Yeah, I think somehow it has to fit in with the artist as well. Like the stuff, like the platforms that you're on have to feel, even if they know that it's paid for, if it feels authentic and real from the artist, it works. But if there's someone that's never had a Snapchat or done anything, and then all of a sudden they're like doing this geo filter Snapchat. I mean, it's just, I mean, I understand that sometimes it fits in and you have to get started, but like it has to feel actually, like people are not stupid.
Yeah.
It still has to feel real. Yeah.
And that's the thing, fans are not stupid.
Yeah.
They're not daft. They know what they like and they know why they like it, and there's no point in anybody trying to tell them something, oh no, you're going to like this, because they'll go, nope, no I won't, don't tell me. Don't tell me anything. And so they should.
Organic and authentic, the two cornerstones of any music conference. But because this is about the future about the future of advertising, and I don't want to stick to social media for ages. How would you guys like to see social media advertising evolve? What would work for you? How would you stand out from the crowd in an ideal world going forward? What could they offer you? What could those platforms offer you? Sorry.
Thanks. Good question.
It is a good question. I think there are actually a combination of things, but I think it's okay. I got off of social media now in my mind. I'll stay put. But I think it's relevant. So obviously with mobile advertising, I mean, that is the standard. I think it's actually really relevant to be aware of that and how that will affect things.
Yeah.
So I do think, for example, the Snapchat geo filter location, for example, is a good example of where it makes sense to have like sort of awareness campaign at an event, for example, that they're playing a gig and you have the Snapchat filter and it's not full on advertising in your face, but people will love it and they'll use it, and they're using it on mobile in the now, like sort of relevancy to the time. And I always think that that's very interesting, regardless actually outside of social media as well, but generally for advertising.
Yeah. I won't make the rest of you answer that question. Because, advertising isn't all digital. You know, like Pat said, for years there have been billboards, there have been magazine ads, all manner of physical product. Where does that sit now in an advertising campaign? When would you bring in something like that? When is the old world style the right thing to do?
I mean, I kind of think old world style makes sense when there's mass awareness. I don't think you can TV advertise or billboard, do outdoor campaigns on something that doesn't already have enormous familiarity. I think that's the kind of crossover point where, you know, you're in the supermarkets, you know, you've got an enormous kind of physical share. I don't think it's, because the cost of product for music has got so low, to have a sort of practical return on investment, you kind of have to balance out economy of scale. So unless you're like, you know, A-list in terms of the scale size of releases you're doing, I think you'll see less and less campaigns TV advertise and do outdoor advertising, and it will be much more heavily digital focused.
I saw a really interesting statistic that said TV ads deliver 71% of all profit generated by advertising, and has an ROI of about £4.20 per pound that's spent. But I'm guessing you have to be M&M, maybe, to get that.
I think that probably allows for a lot of people that literally do the 200 grand spend, you know, and it's those campaigns where it's like, it's about how much you spent. It's not about how many records you sold, you know, it's the loss leader, big name artists, I think, which is probably skewing that.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that, and now the data you can do on TV ads, you can literally look hours later to see if something's gone up on iTunes, if it works. You know, it works on what it works, and it doesn't work on what it doesn't work. It's actually very, very black and white.
Yeah, and I mean that's
it's a joy in
not.
that
It's
way.
not even an. I work with independent labels. Like that's not even a viable option for most of them.
Yeah.
That's you need to do the most of. What's amazing with digital advertising is that you can get a lot for a small spend, and it allows anyone that knows how to work around it, or have the help to work around it, to actually get your word out there. Whereas, I mean, that's not even it's not even on their radar.
Yeah.
It might make sense if you're talking about like online magazines. Occasionally, if there's a really, really niche, for example, for metal, they have a very dedicated fan base where people might go into a specific magazine. If you've taken over that whole website, for example, that might make a lasting impact, where it's a little bit more expensive, but it might be worth it. But I mean, TV, it's not even on their radar.
What about posters on the tube, or sort of your small billboards, not your massive ones? How effective are they?
I love a tube poster myself.
Yeah, I just stop by once in a while as well.
You know, I think again, but you've got to gauge your moment and gauge your time. I think it's good for awareness. It's a great way of shoehorning some records into HMV or Amazon. Sometimes it's like, yeah, we'll put your tube poster. Quick, can I get a cheap deal? You know.
Yeah.
I think that it can fly posting. You know, you can't knock it. It does. It gets in people's eyes, and I think. But again, it's being effective. No, the billboards, no rubbish. But you know, I'd rather do a tube poster campaign than print.
You know, I actually was in Shoreditch a couple of times ago. Actually, just for anyone who doesn't know Shoreditch, it's a very hipster area in London. We went on a street art tour, and on one of the street arts, the tour guide, he was showing us that, okay, if you point your phone to that specific piece of art, you will see other pieces of art emerge, essentially augmented reality. So I'm wondering if you have a lot of static billboards or, you know, static wallpapers on the tube station, that'd be a very interesting way to engage, because, you know, some posters are quite interesting.
Yeah.
If you just have a sign saying, oh, pull out your phone and just look at this, and you have content that just emerges out of it, that could be very interesting way to engage with, you know, as opposed to just you just slather on some glue and just you have any poster.
I totally agree with you, but I also think for tube, I mean, obviously now in Stockholm there's no tube advertising for music. That is, I can't even remember last time I saw that. But in terms of for example, you have to also be aware of those things. That's super interesting, but you have to think, if I put this on the tube, which station? I mean, are people even going to be able to stand there and take the photo? Like,
logistics, yes.
Sometimes you
definitely,
just have to be like,
sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
logical as well about
people's
it.
time is so finite that I think it's like unless technology gets to a point where this is all very accessible in that sort of sense, I think people will struggle to engage with that kind of level of interaction with an advert.
And it's very hard for it to seem a bit contrived as well. I mean, there's one really, really good spot, again, if we're talking about London, but right by Rough Trade East. There's a big billboard site there that you can do all sorts of murals on. And I think some beer brand did an advert there where you could actually, it had beer taps. And you could, it was up for about a week, and it was during some festival or other, but you could actually get beer from it. And that was quite dangerous. Cool. But you know, but things like that you could do, and some of the murals you could do, and you know, look at all the Bowie stuff that went up in Brixton. You know, I mean, that's great. That's not advertising, but it's street art that could, you know, if you've got a good enough idea, you could make that work. You know, but you've got to be. It's a very fine line between being contrived and being creative.
Yeah. And I think, Abby, this is something that you can definitely talk on. We're talking about people don't have time necessarily on the tube to get their phone out. In terms of advertising now, how are we getting smarter on making sure these ads are served at the right time when they matter?
Actually, they're not. So
Okay, good.
they're just not. So I mean, if you think of it, advertising today is typically based on a lot of past information that users have done on other platforms, or what they've done. That's yeah, it's a past history. But how you're talking about music being in the moment, advertising is not really done in the moment. It's done based on, oh, you must have liked XYZ in the past, so let's just give you some more of XYZ. And that's something that advertisers are really missing out on. I mean, if you look at what are the targeting options available, Facebook, by the way, has a very rich targeting set. It's amazingly rich because they have a history from all the way from 2004 that they've been collecting data on people. So yes, but in terms of audio and music advertising, it's very naive. You have the traditional age, gender, maybe the playlist preferences that people have listened to, and a little bit of location. But again, location is raw, latitude, longitude. You can't really do too much with it.
Right.
Advertisers waste a lot of money just hoping that they don't have enough false negatives.
On what
So,
platforms are you talking?
if you look at, I mean, from an actual advertising platform, or are you talking about streaming platforms? You think of the Spotify, Pandora, Deezer.
Yeah.
I mean, Pandora, for example, 80% of the revenue, I think, is what just advertising today. 75, 80%. That's a lot of money that's coming just from advertising.
So in the future, how can we be smarter? What's kind of available, or what should be available? What are we not using that we could be?
Yeah, you have to see, what are users using? Users are enjoying the content on their devices. That's where users are using. So you have to understand, what can I understand about this user at this given moment? So from their device, from their wearable watch, glass, whatever ends up being the mainstream platform. And then tailor their specific advertising for that user, make them feel special. And that's why we are actually talking to one of the advertising companies in London. What they're doing is something really cool. They're working on the demand side of the market, saying, hey, if you get a specific ad request saying, hey, give me an ad for it's an audio ad, give me an ad for this specific user, and personalize it for me. They have a script, just a simple script of, oh, you're in London, the weather, etc. And that same script personalizes based on where the user is, what they're doing, etc. So they have these options that they're coming up with. So this kind of mechanism of being available to advertisers is very useful, and it can actually improve your sales and CPM revenues for streaming companies and the entire chain, definitely.
Do you think audiences want that, or do you think that's too intrusive? Some people get freaked out if something's been following them around websites and giving them the same ad because they looked at a bed 4 months ago.
If you look at it, I mean, that's the way advertising has always worked. If you look at, that's what retargeting is. I mean, I'll just give you an example. If you just bought a Netflix subscription, you'll see Netflix appear on CNN to BBC to everywhere. You'll see Netflix popping up. That's just traditional retargeting.
Yeah.
But in terms of mobile device, yes, it has to be done tastefully.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the things we have to remember is that we're not, what we're advertising is we're not advertising Netflix, we're advertising people, and we're advertising creative works. So I think that's the balance we've got to find, because it's fine with Netflix or holidays or, insurance, or, we've all done it, when you check insurance and you're plagued for 6 months, on stuff. But that's where I think we've got to be careful.
But
what I'm talking about advertising is on the streaming platform. On a music streaming platform, when you have these 15 to 30 second slots, I don't hear a lot of ads about specific artists coming up. I hear ads about from Deliveroo to anyone else. So that's where the revenue is actually coming from. If you look, so you have to and that's where it comes to, okay, what brands fit into that specific artist, or are brands even conscious about that? So that's where the match has to happen. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about streaming services and like you said, the option to have these kind of 15 seconds. Has anyone used them with any of their campaigns? I'm interested in how effective they are. Are people, because if you mute it, it stops, right? So you have to listen to it, you can't get past it. But is it too annoying to be effective? Kind of how does that work?
I think if you're advertising natively in the environment where people are listening to music, that's great, and there's obviously lots of opportunity with that. I think the sort of technological barrier with these kind of in-client audio ads is that the results are sort of reported on a very top-line level, whereby you can just see the amount of people that have engaged with the ad. You really want to see the amount of people that have then gone onto the track, listened to it, maybe they saved it, maybe they shared it. Did they listen to it 50 times? Because then you get a real sort of relative sense of its value. And I don't think it's truly representative if you're just looking at it in a kind of normal media buying convention, which I think at the minute is the bit we're struggling to kind of.
So that data is not available at the moment, or it's
not
offered?
at the minute. That is definitely one of the things that those services are working to kind of, collaboratively make more available to their advertisers and publishers.
Yeah.
But yeah, and with those, I think it's also important to remember, like, that we live in a global world, and Spotify, I mean, if I advertise in the Nordics, it's not going to have the same results as if I advertise in Latin America. For example, South America is a really good, that's one of the places where we probably see the best results in terms of those type of ads. But on the other hand, you might advertise, there's always different reasons for you to advertise as well. So you might advertise because of a different reason in the Nordics, but you still feel like that's the awareness factor, right? So you just want the general awareness of whoever has free, but you know that it's not going to be the same amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's also possibly relevant in terms of what you're sort of advertising. If you're advertising something like ticket sales within, within a playlist or an artist playlist, this, that, and the other, and it could be targeted, and this show's on sale now, or the pre-sales is something that Spotify are sort of trying to work out now, and putting that together. So that can work, but in terms of creating fans through audio ads and streaming, not so much for me.
I think
not much context. I think you need that kind of three-dimensional kind of feel to what you're trying to message that you can't get across from something that's just audio-led.
You can inform on it.
Yeah, and I definitely think the best ones are when you can actually get the artist to do something, a personal audio. So it's not just you. Hey, the new album from this artist is out now.
the Kiss FM
just feels
advert's
weird.
not going to work. No.
We've all done them in desperation. I'll just do it.
We can't really talk about streaming services and the future of advertising without touching on what is slated to be the future of everything, which is obviously voice, Alexa, HomePod, etc. I'm sure there'll be plenty more coming. And the opportunities that are going to present themselves there. Has anyone advertised on there so far? Has anyone experimented?
Not yet.
No?
I think it will be a far more prevalent space over the next few years. But as it stands, we've only sort of experimented with doing stuff on Spotify.
Do you think there would be a chance for you to kind of add skills around an artist, or how would you like to advertise on that? I know, is Sammy is Sammy here? No, she's not. She wrote a really good piece recently about how, did you read it? Yeah, about how you could potentially have almost like a secret word and it could unlock a ticket, which I think is an amazing idea. So does anyone have any ideas about how they'd like to use these kind of things in the future? I mean, what would be the kind of ideal scenario for advertising?
They actually did something it wasn't unlock version, but something similar on Spotify a few years back. In the Nordics, there was this Swedish artist where she had recorded like an audio, and it was just like the day before, I think. Correct me if I'm, sorry if I remember this wrongly. But yeah, and she was just like, "Oh, I'm so excited that my new track is coming out tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. Like, keep your ears out for more." And then she would like just feed like little audio bits, and they saw amazing results with that in comparison to what she would get normally on when her track came out. So those type of things are really interesting. Obviously, that was a little bit more not as secretive, but definitely like it's almost like a story telling sort of way of doing it as well.
I think you've got to be careful. I think you've got to be really careful with Alexa and those voice-activated things that are in your house. I think you've got to be super careful about the intrusiveness of it and how to do it. Whether it's, it's going to be quite easy to piss people off on it. So you say every time you say cornflake, there's an ad for Kellogg's. I mean, if you wanted to do it that way, you've got to be careful.
People will listen to that in the background. Like they're not always going to be, they're not going to be like the active listener. They're just putting it on.
I was listening to a podcast recently that was talking about Alexa, and every time they said Alexa, Alexa would kick off. And it was doing my head in. So 100%. We invite these things into our home, and then who knows how it's going to end. I'm really aware that we've only got 5 minutes left, so I just wanted to open it up and see if anybody wants to ask anything. specific.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm curious to know, in this world where we now teach courses on design thinking and empathy, how do we, and this is a very philosophical question, how do you find meaning? How do you identify what meaning is for someone? There is so much out there that these moments of meaning you're trying to create, like, sorry, I'm probably a bit of a devil's advocate, but what is that?
No, I
Follow
agree.
the music.
Like, I think that's, yeah, and I think that's a really relevant question. I think that's one of the hardest things. I actually, the first thing I do when I start working on a campaign is actually go and read all the comments of fans on their posts and on their YouTube videos and everything, and you actually find a lot of context within that. So, because I don't think it's not only the music that I listen to, it's the food I eat, it's the people I hang out with, it's the brands that I, connect with around that, and I think it's super important to understand that audience, and you will understand what means, what has meaning to them. Obviously, that's the golden question of, like, that's what you're trying to figure out. But I think that's the number one way that I try and just sort out, like, kind of get into their brains and, like, how do they actually connect with each other and how do they connect to the music? And you get that through their comments.
Yeah, I think you ultimately want to find out what is making your audience feel. And when you get a sense for that, then that's your strength that you play to. As, you can't make that connection unless your artist is making that meaningful connection with their audience. So I think it goes hand in hand, and I think it needs to be quite self-explanatory when you're doing these things, and you just have to get a sort of off-the-cuff feel for it.
But it is really difficult because that's what actually influencers are really good at, like finding that meaning with their audience.
I was going to bring up... Sorry, did you want to say... Sorry.
And the fan, which is where it started. Sorry.
Yes, I mean, you have to.
You have to, yeah.
You have to. I mean, if you do something that jars against the artist, I mean, most artists, when you sit down and talk to them, first off, will be like, Facebook's lame, I don't want any ads, no, don't, can we sell lots of records? I mean, they don't like being marketed, and you have to lead them and make them trust you and trust what you're going to do, and I think that's a very, very important thing for all of us to do that. I mean, if the artists don't like it, then it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and they know as well. They often know what works.
And you'll hear, listen, if you do that post that that they hate, whoa, you hear pretty swiftly, or you should do. If you're not hearing, then there's something wrong, but you should do.
I'm just wondering, in any of the Spotify campaign that you've run, can the artists have any control as to what type of ads show up before or after the song plays or their song plays? Do they have any say on that? No. I would doubt it, but I don't know if you might know.
No.
Right?
You haven't actually.
I think you can blank out, you can say, can't you, no, I mean, you can on YouTube, can't you? You say no alcohol, no this, that, and the other. Is I don't know, is Spotify the same?
Yeah, I don't feel like Spotify we've had that
I would
option,
doubt it.
actually.
You would not.
And now we've gotten... At first, the targeting was really, really broad on Spotify. And now it's gotten a little bit better. You can target kind of artists, but then you can't really take out...
It's not that contextual, but it certainly will be in the future.
The future of advertising. Yeah. That was nice. That was a nice wrap up, wasn't it? We've got 2 minutes. Does anyone want to say something? Oh, you went there.
Do any of you trust the metrics from the ad networks, or have you all built your own models to measure ROI?
It's a very good question.
What, from the media buyers?
No, from the ad.
Okay. I think without an alternative, you kind of have to. But if you sort of look at engagement or look at reach, you wouldn't want something that's just really engaged but not reaching anyone, and equally something that's not reaching loads of people but isn't getting engaged. So I think you just have to have a pretty level-headed kind of interpretation of all of those results and use your best judgment. If you're talking specifically to what is getting reported through Facebook or through Twitter or Instagram or whatever, in terms of the media buying process. Was that a question?
Do you have something to measure back what you actually... So you run a campaign, and obviously you're doing that for a reason. Are you then measuring what happens and then comparing that to the metrics you're getting from the platform itself?
I think, yes, you are, and it's what you're measuring, and I think that changes based on the campaign, and it's a case-by-case basis for every single artist, and those kind of measurements will be different for where you are with any given artist at what given time in the campaign. and it's a kind of very free-flowing kind of process, I think.
With any data, you know, the most important thing is firstly to have it, and then what you do with it. You know, you can make stats say virtually anything. You know, if you want to, it's about how you use it and how you move it forward and how you interpret it and where it takes you. So, you know, it's interpretation, as you said.
Yeah, you can take it with a pinch of salt, but you'll kind of get a good overview of an indication of whether it's going.
You trust them enough to give you a rough idea. Is there any?
Sun's coming in.
Yeah, it's very nice. Is there any more, Stu? Oh God, he's going to Stu.
Just said,
I couldn't see
literally
you.
just said, do I need to throw her off stage? No, she's good. She knows it's the last question. Stu, what's your question? Really quick.
Well, you mentioned influencer marketing. Is that a world full of terrible people that's going to end up terribly, or is that going to be useful?
That's a whole nother panel.
3-word answer?
Possibly.
3 words.
2 left.
Possibly and maybe.
Any
yes.
advance?
I think so.
Everyone's an influencer.
Ooh.
Yeah, I would like. Yeah, it's super important to. I think actually to just try and see your artist sort of as much as you can, build it up as an influencer and build up their own properties like mailing lists, phone numbers, and everything, so that you actually can spend ad money on getting a few more new fans.
Breaking the 3-word limit by a margin.
Sorry.
Okay, and that is all the time we have, folks. Thank you very much indeed.